Welcome to the Langflow and Telegram tutorial. In this session, you'll build your first real-life chatbot, the Apartment Manager bot. You'll learn how to integrate Telegram and Langflow with your own Node and Express server to create a no-code chatbot that handles user reports, processes payments, and connects with a database, all with minimal coding. Let's get started. Let's start with a quick demo of the Apartment Manager bot. This flow is already integrated with Telegram. You'll see how a resident chats with the bot to pay their apartment maintenance fees. The bot checks the database for pending payments and sends a link to complete the transaction. After clicking the link, the resident is taken to a payment page to enter card details. Once the payment is complete, the bot instantly confirms it's been received. Next, let's look at the report flow. Here, the bot communicates directly with residents who report problems in their apartment, like water leaks or power issues. It automatically creates a new entry in the database and assigns the task to the right maintenance team. The bot can also check the database to track progress and respond to residents with real-time updates on their issue status. Let's get started by building our integration on Langflow. I'll begin by creating a new blank flow in a fresh project. To start, we need to connect to our database, and for that, I'll be using Langflow's database component. You can refer to Langflow's documentation to learn how to connect an SQL database. This component works with any SQL Alchemy compatible database, which fits our use case perfectly since I'm using SQLite for this demo. If you're following along, just follow the steps in the documentation to set up your own SQLite database. Now I'll connect my database component and check the results. Let's build the report generation and query flow together. First, I'll run a simple select all query to view every entry in the problems table and review the output. Next, we'll create a prompt for the agent to work with this data. Using ChatGPT, I defined the right parameters and constraints for my system, and it generated a precise prompt that I can supply directly to my agent. Back in Langflow, I'm renaming the project and adding a clear description to explain what this flow does. We'll now build a simple RAG flow. I'll take the prompt I generated with ChatGPT and pass it into the prompt template. In the prompt, I've used a variable wrapped in curly brackets, problems, which will dynamically include data from our database. Since the prompt template expects a string, we can't connect the database output directly. So I'll use the parser component to convert the results before passing them to the prompt template. The parser component in Langflow can generate a markdown table by defining each property or column name in a data frame, wrapped in curly brackets. I'm using this to create a richer context for my agent through the problems variable. If you make a mistake while defining the structure, Langflow will immediately alert you, making it simple and beginner-friendly to use. Now the agent can use the prompt with the latest context. Next, I'll set up an agent in Langflow using the Grok component. Grok lets us run high-performance inference with minimal setup, but you'll need to create a Grok account and generate an API key. Don't worry if you don't have one. You can also use any other agent available in Langflow, as the prompt will be passed as a system instruction. Taking the output of my prompt template to the Grok system input and asking it a simple question, and as expected, it gives the correct response. Next, I'll test the problem insert flow, where Grok automatically generates an SQL query to add a new problem, classifies it concisely, and assigns it to the right maintenance team. Everything works perfectly, and I'm really satisfied with how the agent performs. Next, I'll set up a conditional flow using the if-else logic component. Here I'm checking whether the LLM output contains the word insert. I've turned on case sensitivity so it matches exactly, and when this condition is met, the true branch will execute. I've also enabled both case true and case false in the component controls, so data can pass along either branch. When I test the flow, you can see that whenever insert is present, the output goes to the true section, and when it isn't, it correctly routes to the false section. To run the insert query on the database, I'll simply duplicate my existing SQL database component and connect the output of the false branch from the if-else component to the SQL query input. Now let's take a look at the API that needs to be called when the flow runs from the false branch. I'll open the server listener and notice that we need to send the chat ID and message as query parameters to the problem report API. Let's see how we can set this up inside Langflow. I'll search for the API request component, which we'll use to make our API call. Next, I'll enter the URL, and from the component controls, I'll enable the query parameters option. Since I want the chat ID to be passed dynamically, I'll use the prompt template component to build my API URI, with chat ID defined as a dynamic variable. This lets Langflow substitute the correct chat ID automatically during execution. Next, I need to pass the output from the false branch of the if-else component to the query parameters input of the API request component. However, I can't do that directly because the output type is set to message. To fix this, I'll use the type convert component, a very handy tool in Langflow that allows us to convert data from one type to another. In this case, I'll convert the message type into data so that it's compatible with the query parameters input. Once that's done, I can easily map the converted output to the API request component and ensure the correct data gets sent with each request. This small setup step is really useful when you're connecting components that expect different data formats. Now, to create the trigger for our flow, we'll use the Webhook component. A webhook lets us start the flow externally by making a POST request to the URL it provides. Remember, only one webhook component can be used per flow, so this will serve as the main entry point for our report flow. Now, I'll make the API call from the server whenever a user reports an issue or asks a question related to a problem. You don't need to worry about writing the server code yourself. I've added a link to the GitHub repository in the video description so you can check out the complete implementation and follow along easily. Now let's add the finishing touches to our flow. We'll extract the chat ID and the user's query from the body of the webhook component using the parser component. Next, I'll pass the query to the LLM for processing and map the chat ID to the prompt template we created earlier. This allows the bot to send the response back to our server automatically, completing the full end-to-end interaction. Now it's time to test the flow. Let's start the node server and chat with the bot we created on Telegram. Everything should be running through the flow we just built. But wait, what's this? Oh no, an error. The message isn't coming through. Let's head back into Langflow and debug the issue. After reviewing the flow in Langflow, I found that the API request component is throwing an error. This happens because we're testing on localhost, and the component uses validators, a Python library that doesn't support localhost URLs by default. So just for local testing, I'll temporarily comment out that part of the validation code inside the API request component. This is one of the best things about Langflow. It's incredibly flexible. I don't have to wait for any support or updates. I can make the change myself and keep moving forward. Now, when I test the bot on Telegram, everything works perfectly. The flow runs just as expected. Thank you for watching. In this tutorial, you built your first real-world chatbot using Langflow, connected it with Telegram, and automated apartment problem reporting, all without writing a single complex integration from scratch. Don't stop here. Explore, modify, and extend your flow for new ideas and use cases. You'll find the complete project code and resources linked in the description below. And remember, now go with the flow, the Langflow.